Hello, we are here with Grandpa Barney at the
Hello all.
Riverton Family History Library, and we thought this would be a fun thing to do for the children and the grandchildren and even the great-grandchildren, so they can get to know a little bit more about Grandpa Barney, his life, and some of the things that he loved to do and enjoyed. So we're just going to start asking some questions and let him respond to them. Can you give us your full name?
J. Verl Barney.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Salt Lake City, July 4, 1940. Was named after two uncles. An Uncle Jay lived in Ogden, and an Uncle Verl, who was a brother of the mom. Mother.
Okay. And describe the hometown, the area you grew up in.
I grew up in an area that is known as the area of 3300 South on Highland Drive in Salt Lake County. My folks lived in a different place, and then when I was about one, moved to that home, or two or three, I'm not sure. I just remember being at that home, and there was a ditch that separated our home from the home next door north. And we'd step across that ditch to go to see the people on the other side. But it was on Orchard Street, 3260 Orchard Street in Salt Lake, and attended the Wilford Ward that has now been set for demolition, but went there as a young boy.
So tell us a little bit about your mother and your father, what they did for work, and what types of parents they were.
Well, first off, Grandpa Barney and Grandma Barney met each other while serving a mission in the Eastern States Mission. Grandma Barney was from California, Grandpa Barney from Ogden, Utah. He grew up there, and they married when after they had got off their missions. And I think Grandpa Barney stole Grandma Barney away from another gentleman that had been engaged to Grandma Barney.
All right. So tell us, what did Grandpa Barney do for work?
Grandpa Barney worked for a company called Gates Rubber Company. They built or they put together tires and factory belts, automobile belts, and he managed that. He managed that for a number of years and just had real problems. Decided he needed to give that up. And Grandma Barney was working as a secretary at a place called Memorial Gardens of the Valley. They started the area as a cemetery in about the 55 or so, and that is now the Larkin Cemetery. That is on 106 South and 1700 East. But she was a secretary there and was working there when I went on my mission. Grandpa Barney later went back to the Gates Rubber Company in better health and continued to work there until he retired.
Okay. And I remember that Grandma Barney was a great pianist and organist. She played the organ frequently in church as the ward organist.
She did. She also, for a time, played the organ in the Salt Lake Temple. When she'd go up there on the bus and then play the organ for whatever period of time and then come home, but she enjoyed that.
And Grandpa Barney served in numerous church callings, and I remember one that he was in a stake presidency, and he served with someone who is known well throughout the church. Can you tell us who that is?
That was Gordon B. Hinckley. He was serving in what was then the East Mill Creek stake presidency. Elder Hinckley was the second counselor. He was the first counselor, and he had to be released from that because of health reasons.
Did you have President Hinckley in your home from time to time?
Yes. He would come by and bring his kids down to take piano lessons from Grandma, and he'd pick them up and got to meet him then, yes.
So,
And also he was called to the Council of the 12 while I was on my mission, or before I left on my mission, and he came out on 2 or 3 occasions to our mission, and I introduced myself, and he looked at me one time and he said, "Elder, you need to get rid of that camera." I'm hardly taking any pictures with it, but thought I better take that advice.
So we'll move on to some questions more about you in just a minute, but tell us about your siblings that you grew up with, the relationship you had with them.
Had an older brother, Ralph. He was a barber and cut my hair for a number of years. Sister Irene, she was older. She did so many things for the church, so many things to help other people. Great lady. Had a younger brother, Lynn. He was about 7 years younger. He went on a mission to Italy, and then they had a young baby, Dean Bruce. He passed away at about 8 weeks after his birth, 3 to 8. I don't remember how long, but I look forward to the opportunity to meet him again.
And how was your relationship with your siblings?
Got along quite well, although Uncle Ralph, when he was younger, used to scare me sometimes, but took care of me afterwards, looked after me.
You shared a story at Aunt Irene's funeral about how she would teach you to act around the young ladies and just kind of help you with those things. Do you remember that? And can you share what you shared then?
I don't remember what I shared, but I remember the situation, and she was very helpful to instruct me of how to treat young women and how to get along, and I appreciated that.
And you shared a story at Uncle Ralph's funeral about him chasing someone who was teasing you or bullying you. Do you remember that?
I think the story was this. I was in high school, and there was a young lady that I was interested in, and she was working down in the Sugar House area in a new store down there. Made arrangements to meet her after work and to come home to our place in the county there and just spend some time together. Before I went to pick her up, around 5 o'clock, I got a call from a person unidentified and just advised me that if I went to pick up this young lady, that I would be beaten up by a former member of the football team at Granite High School, a fullback. So I asked Ralph if he would help out, and he said, "Yes, I'll go down and I'll wait for the young lady to come out until you drive away." He was waiting at the door where she worked, and the fellow drove by, this former football player drove by and kept on driving. I don't know if it was because Ralph was there or what, but had no interference. The young lady came out, we got in the car, drove home, or to my place, and Uncle Ralph left, and no problem.
So you had mentioned football, and you played high school football for a legendary coach.
That was Coach Edwards.
Yeah,
LaBelle Edwards, that's right.
And did he teach you anything on the field?
Well, we had people that trained us, worked with us, and he supervised our practices and the games. Very, very good person, very good coach.
All right, one last story from your childhood. There's a story that I remember vaguely of you, and I think it was Uncle Lynn lighting the toilet seat on fire. Do you remember that?
Yes, we didn't have fans and deodorants or deodorizers in those days. So what we'd do, we'd strike a match and let it burn. The smoke would fill the air and take away the stench. And so a time or two, I'd put paper in the toilet and set the paper on fire. And Uncle Lynn saw me do that, and he did that, and it burned the toilet seat.
So what's one of your favorite memories growing up, whether it's with your siblings or your parents, or any thoughts on that?
You know, I think one of the favorite memories was going to school, meeting the kids, meeting friends, and enjoying those people.
Okay. Well, these are some questions that your kids had submitted, and so we're going to go through them. And we'll just run down them in order here,
All right.
just so it's easier. They might not be in any specific order, and they might be kind of random. Some might be repetitive, but we'll just ask those. So, what do you think the biggest obstacle was you had to overcome in both your single and married life, and what did you do to work through them?
I think the biggest obstacle was putting things off. And so what I had to learn to do is finish your task. Get your task done. If you need to put it off till tomorrow for whatever reason, but make sure you get it done that day.
Okay. And how did you choose your career as an attorney?
There was an older fellow, young man, but probably about 6 years older than I in our area, named Bill Bailey. And he was going to go to law school. And I kind of admired him and thought that would be interesting. And then the program, Perry Mason, the show about a lawyer, came along, and I'd watched that, and I thought, oh, that would be exciting to be in court. So I decided to be a lawyer. Ended up going to court.
And is it as exciting as the TV show shows?
No, it was more boring.
And was law your first career choice?
Probably in reality, but like the next one asks, any other things? I wanted to be a movie star. Yeah.
Should have been.
You still can, Jake.
I thought maybe I'd get that if I became a lawyer.
It's never too late to live out your dreams.
So when did you finish school? And I assume this means college. And was it a struggle to get your career started? Where did you start?
You know, not necessarily for me. I started with what they had organized before I graduated from law school with what's called the Public Defenders. It was an organization that was sponsored by the county to provide legal services in criminal cases for people that couldn't afford lawyers. And I was hired by the advisor there, Mr. Jimmy Mitsunaga, a lawyer. I worked there for a couple of years and then stayed on 3 years, was given a raise, and bought a new home at that time.
Do you remember your first case?
No, but the first major case I had was a homicide case. A young lady had gone out with some of her friends. She was trying to get resolved in a divorce with her husband, and they were at a club. The husband came in and threatened that she needed to go with him. Her brother had given, or friend had given her a Derringer to carry in her pocket for her protection, and she reached in the pocket and pulled up the gun in the pocket and then fired, killed the fellow. They charged her with murder. Tried that case. The leader of the organization of the public defender had made arrangements to be out of town, so I did that case. But another fellow who later became a director came over and sat with me. Jury found her not guilty.
And I remember seeing that little Derringer hanging on our wall. I think you had it put on a little plaque, or someone did, and gave it to you.
One of the
as
neighbors
your
did
first
that for
major
me.
cases.
Yeah.
So, okay. What were your hobbies and interests as a child?
I like model railroading. My brother got a train, and when he left to me, and I got an interest in building model cars and so forth, but didn't have the room for it, so it didn't really thrive, but that was one of my interests.
And I know we talked about Grandma and Grandpa Barney earlier, but what was your relationship with your parents?
You know, it was very positive, and they were always very considerate and very helpful and gave good guidance.
Okay. What do you consider to be your greatest achievement?
Marrying your mother. That was a great achievement.
And we do have some questions about Mom that will
Okay.
be coming up here. What do you consider to be your biggest regret or failure?
Waiting too long to ask Mother to marry me.
Do you want to tell us the story about that?
Well, we met on a blind date and then dated a little bit afterwards. And it was about 1983, I think, that we met early. And dated around, and there was a time period when I suggested that we date other people, and it was very disappointing to her. And as I thought about it, I went back and apologized and stayed with her dating, and finally in July of 1985 asked her to marry me. I shouldn't have waited so long.
So the Barney boys are all known to be extremely romantic. Right, Melissa?
Yeah.
And we all proposed in some pretty lame ways, I should say, for the most part. Some might have been more creative than others. Tell us how you proposed to Mom.
Well, it's not very
I
exciting.
know. That's why I asked.
Yeah. It was during a break while watching the 10 o'clock news. We were at Grandma and Grandpa's home. I had bought a ring for her, and during that break, I'd slipped her ring off and then slipped her ring on. And she looked surprised, and I asked her if she'd marry me, and she said yes. So we drove up to her parents' home to announce that. I apologized to her father that I hadn't come and asked him. And he just said, well, that's old-fashioned. But anyway, it's not too romantic, but I got through.
So what, this is going to be a kind of a two-part question with these. What was the parenting style of your parents, and what do you think your and Mom's parenting style was?
You know, I think that Mom and Dad just taught us correct principles, and we were then challenged to govern ourselves, and if we misstepped, then they would counsel us. And Caroline's parents, I think, were very practical in raising her, and she was an only child, but she was sure a great mother.
And what do you think yours and Mom's parenting styles was?
I think it was, we would talk things over and agree on a position, usually her position, but we would follow that, and she just was so magnificent in raising the children.
Is there anything you would have done differently as you raised your children?
As I look back on it, I think not. What I did is I stepped back and let her lead, and that was a plus for me.
Okay. So, how did boating become such a desire of yours that we had several boats and a houseboat throughout our lives?
Well, we were invited by Dr. Anderson, a good friend who married a good friend of your mother, and they invited us to go to Lake Powell with them, and they had bought a power boat. We just had such a grand time that we talked it over and decided that's something that we'd like to do for our family. So we bought their boat when they bought a bigger boat, and went to Lake Powell about 3 times a year with the family, and then when that boat got worn or old, we moved to a bigger boat, and then moved to a more powerful boat, and then ended up getting a houseboat, so we didn't have to sleep on the beach. But when all the kids came along, the houseboat wasn't big enough, so they had to sleep on the beach.
So do you remember the name of our first boat?
It was called Desert. We called it. I'm sorry. If you'd have asked me that, I'd have thought about
It
that.
just came to my head.
Yeah.
The Sandbar.
Oh, the Sandbar. That's
And
correct.
why was it called the
It was
Sandbar?
called the Sandbar because was driving back after a trip from Rainbow Bridge area and ran across the sandbar, broke the outdrive. So that's how it got its name, the sandbar.
Do you remember the call letters for the sandbar?
I don't.
I do.
Go ahead,
This
put
is
them
the
in.
sandbar WXV 339 or 5.
Yeah, that would have been the
Calling
serial.
the pumpkin or the jester or whoever we were going to Lake Powell with at the time.
That would
Remember
have
that,
been,
Wes?
that would have been the.
You know,
I remember
That'd been the
I
number
remember
on the
what
boat.
I
number
don't remember the call letters. I just remember that was how Dad addressed everybody. This is the sandbar WXV 339 or 5, reaching out to whoever we were reaching out to
Yeah.
at the time.
That's interesting, yeah.
I don't know why. I just remember it.
So
So,
now you just get on your cell phone.
yep. Who was your favorite teacher as a student and why?
I think the favorite student was probably in 4th grade, Rhea Bailey. She was in our ward, but a very good teacher, very kind, very helpful. But I think she was probably one of the favorite. The others were good teachers, but you got in junior high school and you had so many that would be hard to focus. But I think she was. She was the mother of this Bill Bailey that I had admired, who gave me an incentive to become a lawyer.
And what were your favorite subjects to study in school?
I think that going through school, I think physics, chemistry, and seminary.
Okay.
And I liked history at the university.
And that's what you majored in, right?
I did.
Majored in history. So, do you feel like you had to make any major sacrifices when getting married and having children? Were there things that you kind of had to step away from doing that
Correct.
you enjoyed doing?
I could no longer watch my own TV programs. I had to take second place to the kids.
All right. So tell us some of your favorite memories about Mom.
You know, if I can think back on one event, and I don't remember exactly the time nor her situation, but we were at Lake Powell. We were sitting on the back of the houseboat. Night was coming on, and all the grandkids and kids that were with us were swimming together with their life jackets, and it just was a touching moment. That's one of my favorite times, and to realize that I was sitting with this beautiful woman, the mother of those kids and the grandmother of the grandkids.
Well, and this question is not on the list, but it was one that was on my cell phone that I remembered, and it kind of has to do with that. You and Mom got to travel quite a bit. Tell us about some of the places you were able to visit, and was there anything that was your absolute favorite?
Well, when I graduated from law school, a good friend, Mike Stewart, had been invited with a professor at the university to go to Kiel in Germany, and they invited us, he and his wife, to come and travel with them when they got released that September, the same year that I graduated from law school. We traveled Europe, went from Germany down to Italy, France, Austria, back through areas of the mission, where I served a mission in Switzerland. And that was very, very good. And then we went to pick up Jay in Austria from his mission. You went with us, and cousin Jenny, didn't she go with us on
Yeah.
that? Yeah. And we went through Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and that was just a grand trip. We went several times to California, Lake Powell, and those were great trips with the family. Any you remember?
Well, I remember going to Brazil with Wes
Oh,
and
that's right. Yeah,
picking
we,
up Matt from his mission
That's correct. Yeah, we did.
and going up the Amazon River. That was
And the
pretty cool.
Iguazu Falls.
That you just couldn't get enough
Oh,
of that
that was
place.
amazing. That was amazing.
And then you and Mom were able to do some trips to Egypt and China and
Yeah, we went with Wes and his family and Jody's family to Egypt and to Israel, Jordan. And then for our anniversary, 50 years, we signed on with the company and took a trip to China. Just a grand trip.
And I remember the story you shared about going up the ski lift. Do you remember that? And you were yelling.
Oh, yes.
What you thought you were yelling at people.
Well, yes, we were going up a lift to one of the sites in China. And I had learned how to say hello in Chinese. I think your daughter taught us before we left. And we were on this lift, and people were coming down, and I'd yell out,
Ni hao.
yeah, ni hao, is it?
Ni hao.
Yeah. And the people would laugh. Found out they were from Korea.
Okay.
I remember Carolyn saying Alaska was one of her favorite.
Oh,
She
yeah, the
did.
trip to
She-
Alaska, yes.
She
that
loved that
was,
Alaskan
yeah.
cruise. That's right.
That was a grand trip,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, did you have any traditions that you had growing up as a child that you continued with our family?
I think just doing family trips. We'd go on trips with the family. Grandma had relatives in Oregon and in California, and we got to visit those people. And so when the kids came along, we planned trips that we could do with our kids.
So, beside your parents, aside from them, any other role models or heroes that you had in your life?
I think this fellow I mentioned before, Mr. Bill Bailey, he went on a mission to Denver and was very, very proper and prosperous in missionary work. And I admired his ethics and was glad to follow him.
Okay, so this question you'll never figure out who it came from. Knowing that Matt is your favorite son, who is your second favorite son?
I think what I would do is leave that to the brothers to decide who's favorite and who is second.
Yeah, well, there's another one of those surprise ones from.
And I just say that love them all equally. Thank you.
So, what is your fondest / favorite memory with the family?
You know, I think the trips to Lake Powell, that they were very, very meaningful.
So, what is the best piece of advice that someone ever gave you?
I think the best advice was prepare for a mission and study hard.
Here's another one from that same person who will remain nameless. If you had to choose one of your sons to punch in the face, would it be Jay, Brian, Mike, Wes, or Steve? Somebody was left out of that one.
You know, probably it would be Brian, because I think because of his wife, he would be the most tender.
Okay, well, there you go.
Is that a desire?
What is the best piece of advice you have for your family?
Love your wives and consider their counsel.
Okay, going back to a funnier one. What is the funniest family moment that you can remember?
When I think about that, I think it was being on the houseboat, getting up on the slide and calling out, "I'm going down me slide, don't push." And then the grandkids would gather around and push me down the slide.
That's one of their favorite
They
memories.
still talk about that
Is that
to this
right?
day.
Yeah, they do. That is one of their favorite memories. As a matter of fact, I asked Brooklyn if she wanted to go to Aruba, Hawaii, or somewhere else in the Caribbean for a trip, and she said Lake Powell.
So my kids also. They all want to go to
Yeah,
Powell.
need to do it again, yeah.
What is the funniest joke you can tell us?
You know, I don't know that it's, well, I think one of the funniest things that I say to people, they'll come and I'll say, Jay, how are you doing? And I'll say, well, compared to the Aborigine that was trampled by 32 stampeding elephants, I'm doing okay. So there's a comparison. Leave that comparison. Whatever that happened there, I'm doing better than that.
So,
And,
Go ahead.
and then one of the stories that I remember is this. When we lived in Murray, there was a couple that lived down the street from us, about 3 houses on the opposite side of the street. And the husband passed away. And the neighbor came by one day and said, your son came by with a cheese sandwich. It was Brian, who took the cheese sandwich to console her pain.
I remember that. I just saw Mom always making dinner for people who
were in need,
who had
yeah.
lost, a loved one or
lightning out there?
something happened. Don't remember lightning. The lady lived like, I think 1 or 2 houses down from where lightning
Did you have
was.
to do a secretive route to get around lightning?
I'm sure I was scared going over there, thinking lightning might come out.
Was lightning a dog?
Lightning
Yeah.
was a giant. That's probably probably wasn't
Great
that big,
dog,
really.
yeah.
But back when we were little, it was probably the biggest dog in the history of the world. So I'm gonna save these last 2 questions from us, and I'm gonna jump to a couple you might not have prepared for.
Okay.
But I just thought that these would be interesting. Did you have any medical issues throughout your life?
I had rheumatic fever when I was young. I was treated for that. That dissipated. One time at Lake Powell, I had a gallbladder attack. Had to have the gallbladder removed. An interesting story. A doctor that lived in the ward did the removal, and I tell people, I said, he came in one day and said, boy, everything worked fine. The only problem is you can't get into heaven without a gallbladder. I made that up. But I thought it was kind of fun. So that and pretty well been in pretty good health through the rest of the life. Yeah.
Okay. Did you serve in the military?
I did. I was with the National Guard, went down to Lackland Air Force Base for 3 months, stayed with the Guard, and then went on a mission. When I came back, I went with the Air Force Reserve.
Okay. And what did you do there?
I helped make the coffee and put out the donuts. But didn't drink it.
So, going off with that, was religion an important part of your life? And if so, what did it mean to you?
Very much so. Mom and Dad had served missions. They were very involved and active in the church. Dad had served on a state presidency, high councils, and a bishopric, and just with his example and Mom's, they'd go to the temple, and that was an impression, and I grew up in that atmosphere and was grateful for it. Served a mission, and then worked with our sons to serve missions.
Okay. What scares you the most in your life? Is there anything you're afraid of?
You know, there was a fellow that talked one time in one of the meetings I went to, and he talked about being God-fearing. And he said, we fear God not for punishment, but we fear God for loss of his love. And that's the fear I have, I guess, is I don't want to lose the love of our Father in heaven and his Son.
So here's an interesting one, and again, it's kind of off our list here, but if a newspaper or someone wanted to do a story about you, what would the story be about?
Probably about the goodness of your mother. I think that she was just a marvelous person. She was a single child, didn't have siblings. But somehow she knew how to raise boys. And that's one of the reasons I think that the Lord blessed us with sons, because your mother was so much aware of how to raise sons. That's what my story, I think, would be about.
Okay. So when all is said and done, what do you want to be remembered for? What would you like your legacy to be?
I would hope that children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren would know that I made effort to stay on the covenant path, to treat people kindly and gentle, and to treat them as I'd like to be treated.
Okay. Are there any significant events in your life that helped shape who you are?
I just think growing up in the neighborhood where I was raised, the parents that I had and their instruction, and, teachers in school who were very capable, I think I was influenced by all of that, and good friends growing up, both in school and on mission, a fraternity members that I still visit with, missionaries that we still visit with. I think that's influenced my life a great deal.
Okay. I've just got a couple more questions, but before I get to those, Wes, Melissa, are there any questions that have popped into your minds that you would like to ask Dad?
There probably was, but they were probably earlier.
Okay.
So let's see if I can remember.
All right. Melissa, anything that jumps into
Can
your
we just
mind?
go over dates again? Maybe like when they got married and
Okay.
things like
Yeah.
that.
When were you and Mom married?
We were married on September 25th, 1975.
75?
I'm sorry, 65. We'd have
Say, I was 5 years old when
We'd
we
had
got married.
illegitimate children, right? Yeah. No, 65, September 20th, 1965, yeah.
Okay.
And what year did you guys meet again?
I think it was in the 1963.
Okay. Anything else? When did you graduate from the University of Utah?
I graduated from the University of Utah in, I think it was 1964, and then started law school and graduated law school in 67.
And Mom worked as a teacher while you were in law school, correct?
She did, yeah. She had graduated, I think she had graduated in 63 and was teaching school. And then, bless her heart, because of her, I was able to finish school. And
So she kind of supported you through school
Yeah,
until,
she did, yeah.
basically until Jay was born. Is that right?
well, Jay was born in 68, so that was a year after I graduated. But she was just a tremendous mother.
Yeah.
She was expecting teaching though, right? Because wasn't it different than when you were pregnant and working?
I'm sorry.
I remember her saying something about being pregnant, and it was weird that she had to go to work, or they treated her differently because she was pregnant.
I don't remember that. I remember that during the pregnancy, she had to take some time off in order to make sure that she didn't lose the child.
Was that with Jay?
That was Jay, yeah. And so she was off for several weeks, but got paid during that time period, and then went back, and then Jay was born, and at that point, things were adjusted so that she could be home.
Where did you and Mom first live after you got married?
We lived in a basement apartment from some people that lived up in the Sugar House area. We lived there a couple of years, and then moved into an apartment out on Highland Drive and about 3600 South then built our home in Murray. Lived there for 10 years and then built the home in Sandy where we lived, where our children were raised afterwards.
Okay. And you've lived there since what, 1981?
1981 to the present time, yes.
Anything that you remember about the home? This is the home that, it was kind of Mom's home. She designed it, put it together, was always putting up wallpaper and painting and everything.
Yes, it was Mom's home, that is correct. And she approved the plan. She watched the construction. She furnished it, and the dining room table, she paid that out of money she earned teaching school.
We've had that dining room table for as long as I know that I've lived.
Had it in both houses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, you and Mom did an amazing job raising us. We never saw either of you complain, get angry, yell, or lose your temper. How did you do it, and how did you and Mom find the motivation to wake up every day, go to work, and take care of us? That's kind of a long question, so.
Well, it's a two-part question, but Mom was very, very conscientious. There were times that circumstances with my being involved with the bishopric and being out late became irritating, but she did not share that with the children. And we would talk about it privately, come to a decision in which I would follow her decision, and did not express that to the children. But she was very faithful, and just a pride of my life.
I can honestly say I don't know that I ever saw the two of you argue. I don't know if Wes did, but I don't know that I ever did.
No, but I remember seeing Mom get really mad one time
At Dad?
at the dinner table when we were all laughing. And Dad started laughing, and Mom got up.
Who were we making fun of? Were we making
We were
fun
just
of
laughing,
Mom?
and she just got up and she walked out, even because Dad started laughing too.
I
I'm sure he
remember.
apologized after.
Yeah, I remember when Dad was in the bishopric years and years and years ago, and Mom, we were pretty rowdy in sacrament meeting, and I don't think Mom was. I think we had kind of pushed Mom to her limit, so she basically got up and took us home to leave church, and we were all like, "Yay, yay, we're going home early." So I remember that. But yeah, I don't know that I ever saw, and I do remember if it was you or Mom telling us that you did have your disagreements, but you always did those in private. You never did them in front of the kids.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I remember one of you told us that you did have your
Well, I don't remember Grandma Sharp or Grandma or Grandpa Barty ever getting upset either. So that's probably where you learned it from.
very possible. Very
So
possible.
we're the ones that are starting to rub off
Yeah.
the wrong way.
So if you could sit your grandchildren down in front of you and give them some advice to remember for the rest of their lives, what would that advice be?
I think that advice would be follow the prophet. I think that's my advice. Follow the prophet.
And why is that important?
Because he is a prophet of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And if you follow the prophet, you'll be following your Savior.
Okay. Well, those are all the questions that we have. I don't know if Wes, Melissa, if either of you have any other questions. Do you have? Go
Is
ahead.
there anything that you want to
Yeah,
share
that's what I was gonna say. Do you have any
that we didn't
final
cover?
words or anything that that we haven't covered that you would like to say?
Your mother was just the joy of my life. marvelous person. I was just amazed how she raised 2 children. I always thought, I need to step back and let her move these kids along. She just seemed to know how to do it. And she didn't have siblings. She had friends. She had good lady friends as she grew up. We wanted to have a son, we wanted to have a daughter among the children we had, but I think the Lord knew that she knew how to raise boys, and so gave her 6.
And I know that you and Mom were extremely supportive of all of us and everything we did, going to all sorts of basketball and soccer games and football and track and music events and things like that. And I recall stories of I had a track meet up in Pocatello, Idaho, and I was just running one race around the track one time. Yet you and Mom showed up to watch that. Drove 3.5 hours just to watch that one race. And you were always very supportive of us. You always gave us, we never went without. And there were probably times, then we probably were never aware of it, that finances may not have been easy. Was there ever a time like that?
Oh yes, several. And I was so admiring of your mother. She would sacrifice her own needs and wants to make sure her sons were taken care of. That was your mother.
I cannot remember any times where you basically said to us, hey, we're struggling financially. We need to hold off on this, hold off on that. It was just never mentioned. I think you just kind of not that we would go out and splurge or anything, because we didn't do that, but it was never known to the kids if there were any issues that I can recall.
Well, she was, she planned the budget. She'd prepare the budget and follow, and if we didn't have it, then the things that we wanted would have to wait. But she was very frugal, very frugal.
Well, we sure love you, Dad, and we love the example that both you and Mom were, the sacrifices you made for us, for your grandchildren, and we hope that this is something that will be shared with your posterity for years and years and years to come, so they can know what an amazing man you are that we all look up to.
Well, thank you. It's been a delight, and again, as I say, the gospel that you children have learned or will learn or are learning in your homes through the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I bear witness that you stand by that you support your local authorities, your general authorities, the Relief Society presidents, the Young Women presidents, the primary presidents, and serve. And the Lord will look after you. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
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 Thanks, Dad. Love you.
Thank you. Love you.
12 minutes to spare.
Well, that was delightful. Wes, thanks for coming down.